the waters of Meribah. Korah's rebellion took place in Israel's sojourn in Kadesh Barnea. They remained there 19 years, and then for another 19 years wandered ceaselessly from place to place through the desert. When at last the time decreed by God for their stay in the wilderness was over, and the generation that God had said must die in the desert had paid the penalty for its sin, they returned again to Kadesh Barnea. They took delight in this place, endeared to them by long years of habitation, and settled down in the expectation of a cheerful and agreeable time. But the prophetess Miriam now died, and the loss of the woman, who occupied a place as high as that of her brothers, Moses and Aaron, at once became evident in a way that was perceived by the pious as well as by the godless. She was the only woman who died during the march through the desert, and this occurred for the following reasons. She was a leader of the people together with her brothers, and as these two were not permitted to lead the people into the promised land, she had to share their fate. The well, furthermore, that had provided Israel with water during the march through the desert had been a gift of God to the people, as a reward for the good deeds of this prophetess, and this gift had been limited to the time of the march through the desert, but she had to die shortly before the entrance into the promised land. Hardly had Miriam died when the well also disappeared, and a scarcity of water set in, that all Israel might know that only due to the merits of this pious prophetess had they been spared a lack of water during the 40 years of the march. While Moses and Aaron were now plunged in deep grief for their sister's death, a mob of the people collected to wrangle with them on account of the lack of water. Moses, seeing the multitudes of people approaching from the distance, said to his brother Aaron, "What do these multitudes want?" Aaron replied, "Are not the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob kind-hearted people, and the descendants of kind-hearted people? They come to express their sympathy." Moses, however, said, "You are not able to distinguish between a well-ordered procession and this motley multitude. Were these people assembled in an orderly procession, they would move under the leadership of the rulers of thousands and rulers of hundreds. But behold, they move in disorderly troops. How then can their intentions be to console us?" The two brothers were not long to remain in doubt concerning the purpose of the multitude, for they stepped up to them and began to pick a quarrel with Moses, saying, "It was a heavy blow for us when 14,700 of our men died of the plague. Harder still to bear was the death of those who were swallowed up by the earth and lost their lives in an unnatural way. The heaviest blow of all, however, was the death of those who were consumed at the offering of the incense, whose terrible end is constantly recalled to us by the covering of the altar, fashioned out of the brass plates that came of the censers used by those unfortunate people. But we bore all these blows, and even wish we had all perished simultaneously with them, instead of becoming victims to the tortures of death by thirst." At first they directed their reproaches against Moses alone, since Aaron, on account of his extraordinary love of peace and his kind-heartedness, was the favorite of the people. But once carried away by suffering and rage, they started to hurl their accusations against both the brothers, saying, "Formerly your answer to us had always been that sorrows came on us, and that God did not stand by us because there were sinful and godless men among us. Now that we are a congregation of the Lord, why have you nevertheless led us to this poor place, where there is no water, without which neither man nor beast can live? Why do you not exhort God to have pity on us, since the well of Miriam has vanished with her death?" A righteous man regards the life of his beast, and the fact that these people so near to death still considered the sufferings of their beasts shows that they were really pious men. And in truth, God did not take amiss their words against Moses and Aaron, for God holds no man accountable for that which he utters in distress. For the same reason, neither Moses nor Aaron made reply to the accusations hurled against them, but hurried to the sanctuary to implore God's mercy for his people. They also considered that the holy place might shelter them in case the people meant to lay hands on them. God actually did appear at once and said to them, "Hurry from this place. My children die of thirst, and you have nothing better to do than mourn the death of an old woman?" He then told Moses to speak to the rock that it may bring forth water, but impressed on them the command to bring forth neither honey nor oil out of the rock, but water only. This was to prove God's power, who can pour out of the rock not only such liquids as are contained in it, but water too, that never otherwise issues from a rock. He also ordered Moses to speak to the rock, but not to hit it with his rod. For, said God, the merits of those that sleep in the cave of Machpelah suffice to cause their children to receive water out of the rock. Moses then fetched out of the tabernacle the holy rod, on which was written the ineffable name, and accompanied by Aaron went to the rock to bring water out of it. On the way, all Israel followed him, halting at any rock by the way, fancying that they might fetch water out of it. The grumblers now went about inciting the people against Moses, saying, "Don't you know that the son of Amram had once been Jethro's shepherd? And all shepherds have knowledge of the places in the wilderness that are rich in water. Moses will now try to lead us to such a place where there is water, and then he will cheat us and declare he caused the water to flow out of a rock. If he actually is able to bring forth water out of rocks, then let him fetch it out of any one of the rocks that we see now." Moses could easily have done this, for God said to him, "Let them see the water flow out of the rock they have chosen." But when, on the way to the rock, he turned around and perceived that instead of following him, they stood about in groups around different rocks, each group around some rock favored by it, he commanded them to follow him to the rock on which he had fixed. They, however, said, "We demand that you bring us water out of the rock we have chosen, and if you will not, we do not care to fetch water out of another rock." Moses' anger causes his doom. Throughout 40 years, Moses had tried to refrain from harshly addressing the people, knowing that if but a single time he lost his patience, God would cause him to die in the desert. On this occasion, however, he was mastered by his rage and shouted at Israel the words, "O you madmen, you stiff-necked ones, that desire to teach their teacher, you that shoot on your leaders with arrows, do you think that out of this rock you have chosen we will be able to bring water forth? I vow I will let water flow only out of the rock I have chosen." He addressed these harsh words not to a few among Israel, but to all the people. For God had brought the miracle to pass that the small space in front of the rock held all Israel. Carried away by anger, Moses still further forgot himself, and instead of speaking to the rock, as God had commanded him, he struck a rock chosen by himself. As Moses had not acted according to God's command, the rock did not at once obey, and sent forth only a few drops of water, so that the mockers cried, "Son of Amram, is this for the sucklings and for the babies?" Moses now grew angrier still, and for a second time hit the rock, from which came streams so mighty that many of his enemies met their death in the currents, and at the same time water poured out of all the stones and rocks in the desert. God then said to Moses, "You and Aaron did not believe me. I told you not to hit the rock, but you hit it. You did not sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, because you did not fetch water out of any one of the rocks, as the people wished. You trespassed against me when you said, 'Shall we bring forth water out of this rock?' And you acted contrary to my command because you did not speak to the rock as I had told you. I vow, therefore, that you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them, and not until the Messianic time shall you lead Israel to the Holy Land." God furthermore said to Moses, "You should have learned from the life of Ishmael to have greater faith in me. I told the well to spring up for him, even though he was only a single human being, on account of the merits of his father Abraham. How much more had you a right to expect, you who could refer to the merits of the 3 patriarchs as well as to the peoples? For they accepted the Torah and obeyed my commandments. Yes, even from your own experience you should have drawn greater faith in my will to aid Israel. When in Rephidim you said to me, 'They are almost ready to stone me,' did I not reply, 'Why do you accuse my children? Go with your rod before the people, and you shall smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it. If I wrought for them miracles such as these, when they had not yet accepted the Torah, and did not yet have faith in me, should you not have known how much more I would do for them now? God takes the wise in their own craftiness. He had long before this decreed that Moses would die in the desert, and Moses' offense in Kadesh was only a pretext God employed that he might not seem to be unjust. But he gave Moses the true reason why he did not permit him to enter the promised land, saying, "Would it perchance rebound to your glory if you were to lead into the land a new generation, after you had brought out of Egypt the 60 myriads and buried them in the desert?" People would declare that the generation of the desert has no share in the future world. Therefore, stay with them, that at their head you may after the resurrection enter the promised land. Moses now said to God, "You have decreed that I die in the desert like the generation of the desert that angered you. I implore you, write in your Torah why I have been punished, that future generations may not say I had been like the generation of the desert." God granted this wish, and in several passages of the Scriptures set forth what had really been the offense, on account of which Moses had been prohibited from entering the promised land. It was due only to the transgression at the rock of Kadesh, where Moses failed to sanctify God in the eyes of the children of Israel, and God was sanctified by allowing justice to take its course, without respect of persons, and punished Moses. Hence this place was called Kadesh, sanctity, and Mishpat, fountain of justice, because on this spot justice was passed on Moses, and by this sentence God's name was sanctified. As water had been the occasion for the punishment of Moses, God did not say that what he had created on the second day of creation was good, for on that day he had created water, and that which brought about Moses' death was not good. If the death doomed for Moses on this occasion was a very severe punishment, entirely out of proportion to his offense, then still more so was the death destined for Aaron at the same time. For he had been guilty of no other offense than of joining Moses at his transgression. And whoso joins a transgressor is as bad as the transgressor himself. On this occasion, as usual, Aaron showed his absolute devotion and his faith in God's justice. He might have said, "I have not sinned, why am I to be punished?" But he conquered himself and put up no defense, wherefore Moses greatly praised him. Edom's unbrotherly attitude towards Israel. From Kadesh, Moses sent ambassadors to the king of Edom, requesting him to permit Israel to travel through his territory. For, thought Moses, when our father Jacob with only a small troop of men planned to return to his father's house, which was not situated in Esau's possession, he previously sent a messenger to him to ask his permission. How much more, then, does it behoove us, a people of great numbers, to refrain from entering Edom's territory before receiving his sanction to do so? Moses' ambassadors had been commissioned to bring the following message to the king of Edom. From the time of our grandfather Abraham, there was a promissory note to be redeemed, for God had imposed it on him that in Egypt his seed would be enslaved and tortured. It had been your duty, as well as ours, to redeem this note, and you know that we have done our duty, whereas you were not willing. God had, as you know, promised Abraham that those who had been in bondage in Egypt would receive Canaan for their possession as a reward. That land, therefore, is ours, who were in Egypt. And you, who did shirk the redemption of the debt, have now claimed our land. Let us then pass through your land until we reach ours. Know also that the patriarchs in the grave sympathized with our suffering in Egypt, and when we called out to God to hear us, he sent us one of his ministering angels to lead us out of Egypt. Consider, then, that all your weapons will avail you nothing if we implore God's aid, who will then at once overthrow you and your hosts. For this is our inheritance, and the voice of Jacob never proves ineffectual. That you may not, however, plead that our passage through your land will bring you only annoyances and no gain, I promise you that although we drink out of a well that accompanies us on our travels, and are provided with food through the manna, we shall, nevertheless, purchase water and food from your people, that you may profit by our passage. This was no idle promise, for Moses had actually asked the people to be liberal with their money, that the Edomites might not take them to be poor slaves, but might be convinced that in spite of their stay in Egypt, Israel was a wealthy nation. Moses also pledged to provide the cattle with muzzles during their passage through Edom, that they might do no damage to the land. With these words he ended his message to the king of Edom. To the right and to the left of your land we may pillage and slaughter, but in accord with God's words we may not touch your possession. But all these prayers and pleadings of Moses did no good, for Edom's answer was in the form of a threat. You depend on your inheritance, on the voice of Jacob, which God answers, and I too will depend on my inheritance, the hand and sword of Esau. Israel now had to give up their attempt to reach their land through Edom's territory, not, however, through fear, but because God had permitted them from bringing war on the Edomites, even before they had heard from the embassy that Edom had refused their right of passage. The neighborhood of the godless brings disaster, as Israel was about to experience, for they lost the pious Aaron on the boundary of Edom and buried him on Mount Hor. The cloud that used to precede Israel had indeed been accustomed to level all the mountains, that they might move on level ground. But God retained 3 mountains in the desert, Sinai as the place of the revelation, Nebo as the burial place of Moses, and Hor, consisting of a twin mountain, as a burial place for Aaron. Apart from these 3 mountains, there were none in the desert, but the cloud would leave little elevations on the place where Israel pitched camp, that the sanctuary might be set up there. The 3 shepherds. Aaron died 4 months after the death of his sister Miriam, whereas Moses died nearly 8 months later. Her death took place on the 1st day of Nisan, and that of Moses on the 7th day of Adar in the same year. Although the death of these 3 did not take place in the same month, God spoke of them, saying, "And I cut off the shepherds in 1 month," for he had considered their deaths for 1 month. It is God's way to classify people into related groups, and the death of these 3 pious ones was not considered chronologically with that of the sinful generation of the wanderers, but only after this generation had died was the doom of the 3 sealed. Miriam died first, and the same fate was decreed for her brothers as a consequence of her death. Miriam's death plunged all into deep mourning. Moses and Aaron wept in their apartments, and the people wept in the streets. For 6 hours Moses was ignorant of the disappearance of Miriam's well with Miriam's death, until the Israelites went to him, saying, "How long will you sit here and weep?" He answered, "Shall I not weep for my sister?" They replied, "While you are weeping for one soul, weep at the same time for all of us." "Why?" asked Moses. They said, "We have no water to drink." Then he rose up from the ground, went out, and saw the well without a drop of water. He now began to quarrel with them, saying, "Have I not told you, I am not able to bear you alone? You have rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s, princes, chiefs, elders, and nobles. Let these attend to your needs." Israel, however, said, "All rests with you, for it is you who led us out of Egypt and brought us to this evil place. It is no place of seed or figs, or of vines, or of pomegranates, neither is there any water. If you will give us water, it is well. If not, we will stone you." When Moses heard this, he fled from them and went to the tabernacle. There God said to him, "What ails you?" And Moses replied, "O Lord of the world, your children want to stone me, and if I had not escaped, they would have." God said, "Moses, how much longer will you continue to calumniate my children? Is it not enough that at Horeb you said, They are ready to stone me. Then I answered you, Go up before them, and we will see whether they will stone you or not. Take the rod and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron, and speak to the rock before their eyes, so that it gives forth its water." Moses now went to seek the rock, followed by all Israel, for he did not know which was the rock from which God said water was to flow. For the rock out of which Miriam's well flowed vanished among the rest of the rocks, in such a way that Moses was not able to distinguish it among the number. On the way they saw a rock that dripped, and they took up their places in front of it. When Moses saw that the people stood still, he turned around, and they said to him, "How long will you lead us on?" Moses, "Until I fetch you water out of the rock." The people, "Give us water at once, that we may drink." Moses, "How long do you quarrel? Is there a creature in all the world that so rebels against its maker as you do? When it is certain that God will give you water out of a rock, even though I do not know which one that may be." The people, "You were a prophet and our shepherd during our march through the desert, and now you say, I know not out of which rock God will give you water?" Moses then assembled them about a rock, saying to himself, "If I now speak to the rock, bidding it to bring forth water, and it doesn't, I shall humiliate myself in the presence of the community, for they will say, 'Where is your wisdom?'" Hence he said to the people, "You know that God can perform miracles for you, but he has hidden from me out of which rock he will let the water flow. For whenever the time comes that God wished a man not to know, then his wisdom and understanding are no avail to him." Moses then lifted his rod and let it quietly slide down on the rock, on which he laid it, uttering, as if addressing Israel, "Shall we bring you water out of this rock?" The rock, of its own accord, now began to bring forth water. Then Moses struck it with his rod, and the water no longer came forth, but blood. Moses then said to God, "This rock brings no water." And God instantly turned to the rock with the question, "Why do you bring blood but not water?" The rock answered, "O Lord of the world, why did Moses smite me?" When God asked Moses why he had smitten the rock, he replied, "That it might bring forth water." God, however, said to Moses, "Did I ask you to smite the rock? I only said, 'Speak to it.'" Moses tried to defend himself by saying, "I did speak to it, but that brought nothing." "You," God replied, "have given Israel the instruction, 'In righteousness shall you judge your neighbor.' Why then did you not judge the rock in righteousness, the rock that in Egypt supported you when out of it came honey? Is this the manner in which you repay it? Not only were you unjust to the rock, but you also called my children fools. If then you are a wise man, it does not become you as a wise man to have anything further to do with fools, and therefore you shall not go with them into the land of Israel." At the same time, God added, "Neither you, nor your brother, nor your sister shall set foot on the land of Israel." For even in Egypt, God had warned Moses and Aaron to refrain from calling the Israelites fools. And as Moses, without evoking a protest from Aaron, at the water of Kadesh, called them fools, the punishment of death was decreed for him and his brother. When God informed Moses of the impending punishment due to him and his brother, he then turned to the rock, saying, "Turn your blood into water." And so it came to pass. Preparing Aaron for impending death. As a sign of special favor, God communicates to the pious the day of their death, that they may transmit their crowns to their sons. But God considered it particularly fitting to prepare Moses and Aaron for impending death, saying, "These two pious men throughout their lifetime did nothing without consulting me, and I shall not therefore take them out of this world without previously informing them." When, therefore, Aaron's time approached, God said to Moses, "My servant Moses, who has been faithful in all my house, I have important matters to communicate to you, but it weighs heavy on me." Moses, "What is it?" God, Aaron shall be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land which I have given the children of Israel, because you rebelled against my word at the waters of Meribah. Moses replied, Lord of the world, it is manifest and known before the throne of your glory that you are Lord of all the world and of your creatures, so that we are in your hand, and in your hand it lies to do with us as you will. I am not, however, fit to go to my brother and repeat to him your commission, for he is older than I. How shall I presume to go up to my older brother and say, Go up to Mount Hor and die there? God answered, Not with your lips shall you touch this matter, but take Aaron and Eleazar his son and bring them up to Mount Hor. You go up with them, and there speak with your brother sweet and gentle words, the burden of which will, however, prepare him for what awaits him. Later, when all three of you are on the mountain, strip Aaron of his garments and put them on Eleazar his son, and Aaron shall be gathered to his people and die there. As a favor to me, prepare Aaron for his death, for I am ashamed to tell him myself. When Moses heard this, there was a tumult in his heart, and he knew not what to do. He wept so passionately that his grief for the impending loss of his brother brought him to the brink of death himself. As a faithful servant of God, however, nothing remained for him to do but execute his master's command. Hence he went to Aaron in the tabernacle to inform him of his death. Now it had been customary during the 40 years' march through the desert for the people daily to gather, first before the 70 elders, then under their guidance before the princes of the tribes, then for all of them to appear before Eleazar and Aaron, and with these go to Moses, to present to him their morning greeting. On this day, however, Moses made a change in this custom, and after having wept through the night, at the rooster's crow, summoned Eleazar before him and said, Go and call to me the elders and the princes, for I have to convey to them a commission from the Lord. Accompanied by these men, Moses now went to Aaron, who seeing Moses asked, Why have you made a change in the usual custom? Moses, God has told me to make a communication to you. Aaron, tell it to me. Moses, wait until we are out of doors. Aaron then donned his 8 priestly garments, and both went out. Now it had always been the custom for Moses, whenever he went from his house to the tabernacle, to walk in the center, with Aaron at his right, Eleazar at his left, and the elders at both sides, and the people following in the rear. On arriving within the tabernacle, Aaron would seat himself at Moses' right hand, Eleazar at his left, and the elders and princes in front. On this day, however, Moses changed the order. Aaron walked in the center, Moses at his right hand, Eleazar at his left, the elders and princes at both sides, and the rest of the people following. When the Israelites saw this, they rejoiced greatly, saying, Aaron now has a higher degree of the Holy Spirit than Moses, and therefore Moses yields to him the place of honor in the center. The people loved Aaron better than Moses, for ever since Aaron had become aware that through the construction of the golden calf he had brought about the transgression of Israel, it was his endeavor through the rest of his life to atone for his sin. He would go from house to house, and whenever he found someone who did not know how to recite his Shema, he taught him how. If one did not know how to pray, he taught him how to pray. And if he found one not capable of penetrating into the study of the Torah, he initiated him into it. He did not, however, consider his task restricted to establishing peace between God and man, but strove to establish peace between the learned and the ignorant, among the scholars themselves, among the ignorant, and between man and wife. Hence the people loved him very dearly, and rejoiced when they believed he had now attained a higher rank than Moses. Having arrived at the tabernacle, Aaron wanted to enter, but Moses held him back, saying, We shall now go beyond the camp. When they were outside the camp, Aaron said to Moses, Tell me the commission God has given you. Moses answered, Wait until we reach the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, Moses said to the people, Stay here until we return. I, Aaron, and Eleazar will go to the top of the mountain and will return when we have heard the divine revelation. All three ascended. Next, Aaron's death. End part 64 of 95, TheLegendsOfTheJews.com.